All right, listen up, because what I'm about to tell you might finally give you the clarity you've been waiting for. You ever feel like you're stuck in a relationship limbo with someone who pulls away just when things start getting real? One minute they're close, the next they're cold. It's confusing, it's painful, and worst of all, it leaves you questioning everything. But here's the truth. There is a way to see what's really going on behind that avoidant behavior. And it only takes 7 seconds. That's right, 7 seconds. This isn't a game. It's a psychological insight bomb that cuts through the mixed signals and shows you exactly where they stand. So if you're tired of guessing, if you're ready to stop overthinking and start knowing, stay with me because what you're about to learn will change how you read people forever. Let's go. People often find themselves caught in confusing relationship dynamics, especially with someone who displays avoidant tendencies. One of the most frustrating and painful patterns to experience is what's commonly referred to as the push-pull dynamic. This is where the avoidant partner seems to pull you in emotionally, showing interest, affection, even vulnerability, only to suddenly withdraw, grow distant, or become emotionally unavailable just as things begin to deepen. It creates a cycle that is hard to predict, but even harder to ignore. And it leaves the other person constantly questioning what went wrong or what they did to cause the shift. At the heart of this push-pull pattern is fear, specifically the fear of emotional closeness and intimacy. People with avoidant attachment styles crave connection just like anyone else, but their internal wiring makes closeness feel threatening for them. Emotional intimacy triggers subconscious fears of being engulfed, losing autonomy, or being hurt. So while they may initially move toward a partner when things feel safe or when the emotional stakes are low, they quickly retreat the moment vulnerability or dependency begins to surface. It's not that they don't care. It's that caring too much makes them feel exposed. And that exposure feels like danger. This is what makes the push-pull pattern so confusing. When they're in the pull phase, they're engaging, charming, and present. They might initiate contact, share personal stories, or make future plans. These are the moments that make you think, they really do like me. Maybe we're finally getting somewhere. But as soon as the relationship begins to feel more emotionally intimate, maybe after a deep conversation, a weekend trip, or a moment of real connection, they shift. The calls slow down. The messages grow shorter. Their tone changes. Sometimes they'll even pick a fight or create distance on purpose, almost like a subconscious defense mechanism. They're not necessarily aware they're doing it, but to them, pulling away feels safer than risking vulnerability. For the person on the receiving end, this behavior is emotionally destabilizing. It makes you doubt your own intuition. You start wondering if you're imagining things, if you're too needy, if you're pushing them away by wanting too much. But the truth is, it's not about you. It's about the avoidant person's internal conflict. They want connection, but they fear what it means. They desire closeness, but closeness feels threatening to their sense of control and independence. So they pull you in because the desire is real and then push you away because the fear is just as strong. This push-pull cycle can become a kind of emotional addiction. The pull moments feel so good, so validating, that you start chasing them. Even if you have to tolerate long stretches of emotional distance in between, you become hooked on the potential of the relationship, on the version of them you see when they let their guard down. But unless something shifts, unless the avoidant person is actively working on their patterns and fears, this cycle usually continues. It doesn't mean they're a bad person, and it certainly doesn't mean you're not enough. But understanding the pattern helps you step out of the confusion and see the situation for what it really is. Many people end up stuck in these dynamics for months, even years, because they keep hoping the pull version of the person will eventually stay. They believe if they're patient, supportive, or loving enough, the avoidant partner will stop running. But unfortunately, emotional safety can't be forced on someone until they feel secure enough in themselves to stay connected even when it's uncomfortable. The cycle will likely repeat. What makes this pattern particularly deceptive is that avoidants often don't leave the relationship outright. Instead of breaking things off, they keep things in a kind of limbo, just close enough to keep you hopeful, but never fully available. This keeps the other person emotionally hooked, constantly trying to earn the connection again. And that's why recognizing the push-pull dynamic is so important. Once you see it, you stop internalizing the mixed signals. You stop blaming yourself for their retreat. You start understanding that their behavior is about their inner emotional world, not your worth, your value, or your ability to love them. If you're in a dynamic like this, the first step is awareness. See the cycle for what it is. Pay attention to how often you feel anxious, confused, or unworthy. Ask yourself if the connection brings out peace or insecurity in you. And most importantly, remind yourself that you deserve consistent, safe, and mutual love, not love that only shows up in glimpses followed by silence. The push-pull pattern isn't love, it's fear dressed up as connection. The moment you stop chasing the pull is the moment you start choosing your own peace over their emotional chaos. Avoidant individuals often have a complex and deep-rooted relationship with emotional closeness, one that's shaped not by a lack of desire for intimacy, but by a fear of what that closeness represents. To understand why emotional closeness triggers distance and avoidance, you have to look beneath the surface of their behavior and into the psychological and emotional framework that guides their reactions. At first glance, it may seem contradictory. How can someone crave love and connection yet pull away when they start to get it? But once you understand their internal world, the pattern starts to make painful but clear sense. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, closeness is not just emotionally unfamiliar, it can feel like a threat. These individuals may have grown up in environments where emotional needs were met with rejection, criticism, or emotional unavailability. As a result, they learned often unconsciously that vulnerability is dangerous. They were conditioned to believe that relying on others leads to disappointment or rejection. So they built an internal world that prioritizes self-sufficiency, independence, and emotional control. To them, needing someone else or letting someone truly see their inner world feels risky. It invites the possibility of being hurt, judged, or abandoned. Emotional closeness begins to develop in a relationship through shared vulnerability, consistency, or a deepening emotional bond. It often activates old fears and defense mechanisms in avoidant individuals. Even if the person they're connecting with is loving and safe, the closeness starts to feel overwhelming. It's not that the closeness itself is harmful, but that it awakens buried fears and emotional discomforts they haven't fully processed or healed. This creates an internal conflict. On one hand, they're drawn to intimacy and connection. On the other, they fear the vulnerability that comes with it. The closer they feel to someone, the more exposed and emotionally naked they become. And for avoidance, that exposure can feel intolerable. That's when the distancing begins. The shift can be subtle or abrupt, but it's always rooted in the same underlying reaction: protectiveness. The avoidant instinct is to retreat, to regain space and emotional control. This might show up as withdrawing emotionally, becoming less responsive, picking fights, focusing on flaws in their partner, or even physically pulling away. These actions are not necessarily intentional or malicious. In fact, many avoidants don't fully understand why they're acting the way they are in the moment. It just feels like they need air, like the emotional intimacy has become too intense, and they need to shut it down to feel safe again. This distancing isn't about the other person doing something wrong. It's about the avoidant person hitting a limit on how much emotional intensity they can tolerate. They may even feel guilt or confusion about their own reaction. They might genuinely miss the person they're pulling away from, but missing someone doesn't override the deeper fear that closeness will eventually lead to pain. Their mind might start offering justifications. This is too fast. I'm not ready for something serious. I don't know if I really feel the same anymore. These thoughts are protective. They help create enough emotional distance to lower the discomfort, even if it means sabotaging a potentially healthy relationship. To the person on the receiving end, this behavior feels deeply personal and bewildering. One moment, there's connection and closeness. The next, it feels like the other person is gone, not physically, maybe, but emotionally. The warmth is replaced by coolness. Affection becomes aloofness. The openness is replaced with withdrawal. And because there is no fight or obvious rupture, it feels like the emotional rug was pulled out for no reason. Naturally, this leaves the other person feeling hurt, confused, and desperate to reestablish the connection. But this often pushes the avoidant partner even further away because the emotional pressure they're already struggling with now feels intensified. What's important to understand is that this response isn't about the quality of the relationship. It's about the avoidant person's tolerance for intimacy. They may care deeply, but their capacity for staying close is limited by fears they haven't yet faced or processed. And unless they're actively doing the inner work to expand that capacity, closeness will always feel threatening after a certain point. That doesn't mean they're incapable of love, but it does mean they struggle with sustaining emotional intimacy in a consistent, healthy way. The tragic irony is that what they fear, being abandoned or hurt, is often a result of the very behavior they engage in to protect themselves. By pulling away when things get close, they create the very disconnection they fear, and unless they become aware of this cycle and learn to sit with the discomfort of vulnerability, the pattern will repeat, relationship after relationship. For anyone in a relationship with an avoidant partner, recognizing this pattern is crucial. It helps you take their distancing less personally and see it for what it is, a defense, not a verdict on your worth. It also empowers you to make choices that protect your own emotional well-being rather than constantly trying to fix the connection or prove your value. Because the truth is, closeness shouldn't feel like a threat. Real intimacy is about mutual openness, not emotional hide and seek. And if closeness makes someone run, it's not your job to chase. Avoidant attachment is a relational style that develops early in life and influences the way a person connects with others emotionally, especially in romantic relationships. To truly understand the psychology behind avoidant attachment, you need to explore where it comes from, how it manifests, and what internal beliefs and fears are driving the behaviors. This isn't about blaming someone for how they are, it's about uncovering the hidden emotional framework that makes emotional closeness feel unsafe, even when they deeply want love and connection. Avoidant attachment typically begins in childhood, often in response to caregivers who are emotionally distant, inconsistent, critical, or unavailable. These children learn through experience that expressing needs, showing vulnerability, or relying on others often led to rejection, disinterest, or emotional pain. As a result, they adapt. They learn to suppress their emotional needs, minimize their dependency on others, and rely heavily on themselves for comfort and security. This self-sufficiency became a survival strategy. If no one was going to meet their emotional needs, it felt safer not to have any at all. Over time, this coping mechanism becomes hardwired. By the time they reach adulthood, individuals with avoidant attachment often don't even realize they're suppressing their emotional responses. They operate under the belief that needing others is a sign of weakness, that emotions are messy and best kept hidden, and that independence is the only way to stay in control. They're not emotionless, but they've developed a strong instinct to keep emotions at a safe distance from themselves and from others. In romantic relationships, this plays out in very specific ways. When things are casual and there's no threat of deep emotional involvement, avoidantly attached individuals can be charming, engaged, even affectionate. But once the relationship begins to require vulnerability, emotional reciprocity, or commitment, their defenses kick in. They may feel overwhelmed, suffocated, or panicked, not necessarily because their partner is doing anything wrong, but because the emotional closeness triggers old fears. Their mind interprets intimacy as a loss of control, and control is something they've clung to their entire lives to feel safe. These responses are largely unconscious. The avoidant person might not understand why they suddenly feel irritated by their partner or why they begin focusing on flaws or reasons to leave. They might feel the need for space without knowing why. They could start fantasizing about freedom or idealizing other people outside the relationship. All of this is part of a psychological distancing strategy. The mind of an avoidantly attached person creates space to regulate the intensity of the emotional closeness they're experiencing. This space gives them relief from the discomfort, but it comes at the cost of connection. Avoidant individuals often struggle with emotional expression. They're not comfortable talking about feelings, especially their own. When confronted with conflict or emotional conversations, they may shut down, get defensive, or withdraw. They see emotional dependency as risky, both in themselves and others. So when their partner expresses a need for reassurance or closeness, it can feel to them like a threat or an emotional demand they're not equipped to meet. Rather than leaning in, they retreat to protect their autonomy and internal equilibrium. This creates a painful dynamic in relationships, especially when the avoidant person is paired with someone who has an anxious attachment style. The anxious partner craves closeness, seeks reassurance, and wants emotional availability. The avoidant partner withdraws, avoids emotional intensity, and feels overwhelmed by the very closeness the anxious partner seeks. The more the anxious partner reaches out, the more the avoidant partner pulls away. It becomes a loop of emotional chasing and distancing that reinforces each person's deepest fears. The anxious partner feels abandoned, and the avoidant partner feels smothered. At the root of avoidant attachment is a deep and often hidden fear of vulnerability. Vulnerability to them feels like exposure, and exposure feels like danger. Because of their early experiences, they associate being emotionally open with the potential for being hurt, rejected, or criticized. So rather than risk that pain, they preemptively distance themselves. It's not that they don't want love, it's that love in its raw and honest form feels unfamiliar and unpredictable. They may tell themselves that they just aren't emotional or that they don't do intimacy, but underneath that story is often a fear they haven't fully named. Another important aspect of avoidant attachment is how it affects self-perception. Avoidant individuals often pride themselves on being strong, independent, and emotionally in control. These traits become part of their identity, and anything that challenges that identity, like emotional neediness or dependence, feels like a threat to their sense of self. They may view people who are open with their feelings as weak or unstable, not because it's objectively true, but because it conflicts with the emotional armor they've spent a lifetime constructing. Understanding the psychology of avoidant attachment is not about labeling someone as broken or toxic. It's about recognizing that their behaviors are protective strategies developed in response to emotional wounds they may not even fully remember. Healing avoidant attachment doesn't come from forcing someone to open up or pushing them for more. It comes from helping them feel emotionally safe enough to stay present, to slowly unlearn the belief that closeness is dangerous, and to realize that true intimacy doesn't threaten their freedom. It enhances it. But that kind of transformation takes awareness, time, and a willingness to confront old fears with compassion and courage. The 7-second test is a deceptively simple but deeply revealing tool for understanding what an avoidant person truly feels beneath their emotional defenses. It's not a trick or manipulation. It's a moment of presence, a quiet invitation that reveals more in 7 seconds than words often can. This test cuts through the confusion, the mixed signals, and the emotional push-pull dynamic that so often leaves people second-guessing where they stand with someone who has avoidant tendencies. Here's how it works. You initiate a moment of sustained emotional closeness, something small but intimate. This could be prolonged eye contact, a quiet pause after a moment of vulnerability, or even just a hug that lasts longer than usual, about 7 seconds. The key is not the exact action, but the emotional space it creates. You are, in essence, holding a mirror up to the avoidant person's internal world without saying anything. And in those few seconds, their response, or more importantly, their reaction, will tell you everything you need to know. Avoidant individuals are highly sensitive to emotional intimacy, even if they don't show it outwardly. When closeness lasts longer than they're comfortable with, their internal alarm system starts to go off. Their body language shifts. They might pull away, make a joke, break eye contact, or suddenly change the subject. It's not random. It's a defense mechanism. Their nervous system perceives the emotional moment as a threat to their autonomy or control. So they disconnect, not because they don't care, but because staying emotionally present feels unsafe. On the other hand, if they're willing to stay in that moment with you, if they soften, lean in, or seem grounded rather than squirming, it's a sign their guard is down, even if only temporarily. It means you've touched something real, something they're not running from. It doesn't mean they're suddenly secure or emotionally available, but it does mean that, at least for that moment, they feel emotionally safe with you, and that's a powerful thing to witness. What makes this test so effective is that it bypasses the mind and speaks directly to the nervous system. Avoidants are often skilled at using logic to explain or justify their behavior. They'll tell you they're just busy, not ready, unsure, or that they need space. But when you're in that brief, emotionally charged moment, the body reacts before the mind has time to spin a narrative. You're watching their instinct, not their excuse. And instincts don't lie. You're not testing them to judge or punish. You're observing to understand. Because so many people in relationships with avoidance are left in emotional limbo, waiting for clarity that never comes. They overanalyze texts, overthink conversations, and try to decode behavior that doesn't follow a clear pattern. But the truth is, avoidant attachment isn't about logic, it's about emotional safety. And the 7-second test offers a window into whether that safety exists between you, even in a small way. It's important to approach this test with the right mindset. You're not looking for perfection. Avoidant individuals are often caught in a battle between desire and fear. They may hesitate or seem tense, not because they don't care, but because they're learning how to tolerate closeness. What you're really looking for is this. Do they lean in even a little, or do they shut down completely? Do they recover and stay connected, or do they immediately pull back into themselves? That nuance matters. This test also tells you something about yourself. How do you feel in those 7 seconds? Are you anxious, hoping for a certain reaction? Are you calm, or are you scared of being rejected? The way you experience that pause can reveal your own attachment patterns and emotional needs. The test is not only a window into the other person, it's a mirror for you. It shows you what kind of emotional presence you're asking for and whether the other person can truly meet you there. What happens after the test can be just as revealing. If the person starts to behave more distantly afterward, it could mean the emotional moment made them uncomfortable. They might need space to re-regulate, or they might be avoiding the closeness altogether. If they seem more open, more engaged, or even more affectionate, it means the emotional connection resonated in a meaningful way. It might have bypassed some of their usual defenses, reminding them that intimacy doesn't have to equal danger. Keep in mind, though, that this test is not a magic solution. It's a tool for insight, not a cure for avoidant attachment. Even if you get a positive response, it doesn't mean the person is ready for full emotional availability or long-term closeness. What it does give you is clarity. Clarity about where they are emotionally, what their body is saying, even if their words are vague, and whether their actions align with their feelings. In relationships marked by uncertainty, clarity is power. It helps you stop chasing mixed signals and start making decisions based on truth instead of hope. The 7-second test offers that clarity in a quiet, honest way. It doesn't rely on ultimatums, drama, or emotional arguments. It relies on presence, observation, and emotional honesty. In a world full of noise, sometimes the most powerful truth comes in silence and in watching how someone handles 7 seconds of real, unguarded connection. When dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, one of the most confusing and emotionally draining experiences is the inconsistent behavior they exhibit. This unpredictable rhythm of pulling you in only to push you away again. It creates a cycle that can leave you constantly questioning their feelings, your own worth, and the reality of the relationship. But behind that inconsistency lies a deeper emotional pattern that makes perfect sense once you begin to understand the emotional ambivalence and internal conflict avoidants live with on a daily basis. Avoidant individuals often live in a psychological tug-of-war between the desire for connection and the fear of it. Deep down, they want love and intimacy just as much as anyone else. They crave being seen, accepted, and loved. But the moment those feelings start to surface or deepen, their internal alarms go off. It's not a conscious decision. It's an automatic defense system rooted in their early emotional conditioning. And so they instinctively push people away, not because they've stopped caring, but because the closeness starts to feel unsafe. The problem is that once the avoidant person creates that distance, it doesn't actually satisfy them. Isolation doesn't feel good forever. It only offers temporary relief from the discomfort of intimacy. After a period of time alone, when they've calmed their emotional nervous system and feel back in control, they often begin to miss the connection they distanced themselves from. They remember the good moments. They long for the emotional support. And so they reach out again. This is the pull you back in part of the cycle. They might send a sweet message, act affectionate, or even apologize in subtle ways. Not necessarily with words, but with behavior that suggests they want to reconnect. This cycle can be incredibly confusing for the person on the receiving end. Just when you start to accept the distance or consider moving on, they show up again with warmth, interest, or vulnerability. It feels real, and in that moment, it often is. The avoidant person isn't pretending. They genuinely want the connection, but what's missing is the capacity to sustain it without slipping back into fear and withdrawal. This inconsistency isn't a game or manipulation, though it can feel that way. It's a reflection of emotional ambivalence. I want to be close, but I don't feel safe being close for long. That emotional ambivalence is incredibly destabilizing for both people in the relationship. For the avoidant, they're living in constant emotional contradiction. They feel lonely when they're apart from you, but anxious when things get too close. So their solution is to maintain an emotional sweet spot where they can keep you close enough to feel connected, but distant enough to feel in control. For the other person, that sweet spot feels like emotional purgatory. You're close, but never quite close enough. You're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. And that emotional instability can be exhausting and heartbreaking over time. What makes this cycle even more painful is that during the pull you in phase, avoidant individuals can seem incredibly loving and present. They might open up, be more affectionate, even make plans for the future. This gives you hope. Hope that they've changed, that the distance is behind you, that the relationship is finally moving forward. But unless they've done real inner work to understand and challenge their attachment style, the cycle usually repeats. The intimacy builds, the discomfort returns, and they retreat again. This pattern can happen over weeks, months, or even years. The push-pull dynamic becomes a kind of emotional addiction. Both people become hooked, not necessarily on each other, but on the high and low emotional rhythm of the relationship. The relief and pleasure of reconnection becomes so powerful that they override the red flags of the withdrawal. You begin to measure the strength of the bond, not by its stability, but by how intense the reconnection feels after separation. It starts to mimic the emotional cycles of trauma bonding, where emotional intensity is mistaken for love and intermittent validation keeps you emotionally invested. Understanding this cycle is crucial if you want to regain your emotional footing. The key realization is that someone can have strong feelings for you and still not be emotionally available. Affection is not the same as emotional consistency. Missing you is not the same as being capable of showing up for you. Just because someone pulls you back in doesn't mean they're ready or able to stay. That realization can be painful, especially if you've been holding on to the hope that their affection means they've changed. But it's also liberating because it helps you stop interpreting their behavior as a reflection of your worth and start seeing it as a reflection of their internal conflict. What you do with that insight is a personal choice. Some people choose to wait it out, hoping their partner will eventually confront their fears and grow. Others decide to protect their own peace and walk away. There's no universally right answer. But whatever path you choose, understanding the emotional ambivalence behind the push-pull cycle gives you clarity, and with clarity comes power. Power to stop questioning your sanity. Power to stop overanalyzing every text. Power to stop chasing emotional crumbs and start asking for the full meal you deserve. Because love shouldn't feel like emotional whiplash. True intimacy doesn't involve running and chasing. It involves standing still together consistently, even when it's uncomfortable. And if someone can't meet you there, it's not your job to drag them. It's your job to decide how long you're willing to wait for someone to become ready for the kind of love you're already prepared to give. When you're in a relationship with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, one of the hardest and most important lessons to learn is that you cannot force emotional closeness. You cannot talk someone into healing. You cannot love them hard enough to change their wiring, and you cannot drag them into a level of vulnerability they are not ready or willing to enter. It's a painful truth because most people who find themselves drawn to avoidance tend to be incredibly empathetic, emotionally open, and deeply committed to the idea that love can conquer all. But when it comes to avoidant attachment, love isn't enough, not unless the other person is doing the work too. Avoidants have learned, often since childhood, to protect themselves from emotional intimacy. That protection becomes their emotional operating system. And no matter how patient, loving, or available you are, they will still retreat, shut down, or push you away when things start to feel too emotionally intense. This isn't about you doing something wrong. It's about their internal system telling them that closeness equals vulnerability and vulnerability equals danger. Until that internal belief is challenged and reprogrammed, they will continue to respond the same way, no matter who they are with or how much they care. This is why you can't love an avoidant person into healing. Healing is an inside job. It requires self-awareness, emotional accountability, and the willingness to face fears that have been buried for a long time. It involves recognizing patterns, challenging beliefs, and doing the uncomfortable work of slowly learning to tolerate closeness without self-sabotage. If the avoidant individual isn't actively choosing that path for themselves, then no amount of effort from you will break through their emotional walls. In fact, trying harder often backfires. The more you push, the more they retreat. The more you ask for connection, the more they feel pressured, which triggers their fear of being controlled or consumed. That's where the concept of emotional detachment comes in, not as coldness, but as a boundary rooted in self-respect. When you detach emotionally, you stop trying to manage the other person's experience. You stop trying to earn their love, fix their fears, or prove your worth. You step out of the role of caretaker or savior and step into your own emotional center. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop abandoning yourself in the name of love. Detachment is powerful because it puts you back in control, not of the relationship, but of your emotional peace. You begin to see the dynamic clearly without being pulled into the highs and lows. You stop reacting to every withdrawal, every text delay, every mixed signal. You understand that their behavior is about their emotional limits, not your inadequacy. And with that clarity, you gain space to ask the hard questions. Is this relationship truly nourishing me? Am I constantly giving without receiving? Am I confusing intensity for intimacy? Another painful truth is that sometimes the best way to love an avoidant is to step back, not to punish them or play games, but to give them the emotional room to face themselves. When you're always available, always reassuring, always filling the emotional gaps, they never have to confront the consequences of their avoidance. They never have to miss you. They never have to face the discomfort that comes from losing connection because of their own behavior. But when you step back, not in anger, but in self-preservation, you create a space where change becomes possible. Not guaranteed, but possible. It's in that space that some avoidant individuals begin to wake up. They begin to feel the absence of the connection they took for granted. They begin to see their patterns more clearly because there's no one there cushioning the fallout. That discomfort can be the catalyst for growth, but only if they're ready. Some people will choose to remain closed off. Others will choose to grow. Either way, your role is not to force an outcome. Your role is to stay grounded in your own truth and honor your emotional needs. Choosing not to chase doesn't mean giving up on love. It means choosing a different kind of love, the kind that doesn't require you to shrink, overextend, or live in emotional limbo. It means being brave enough to say, I want deep, mutual connection. And if you can't meet me there, I release you with love. That's not weakness, that's strength. That's self-worth. Ultimately, relationships are not just about chemistry or desire. They're about compatibility in emotional capacity. You can care deeply for someone and still not be emotionally aligned. You can want a future with them and still recognize that they are not capable of showing up in the ways you need. That's not cynicism. It's emotional maturity. It's the understanding that real intimacy requires two people both willing to meet in the middle, both willing to grow, both willing to choose love over fear. If someone is still choosing fear of closeness, of commitment, of vulnerability, you can respect that choice without making yourself small in the process. Letting go of someone who isn't emotionally available is not a failure. It's a declaration of what you deserve. And if they are ever ready to truly show up, they'll find you standing strong, not waiting, but living whole and full of your own light. Because the love that lasts is the one that is mutual, secure, and rooted in freedom, not the kind you have to chase, fix, or prove. Here's the truth. Love doesn't have to be a guessing game. If you find yourself constantly trying to decode someone's mixed signals, clinging to moments of closeness only to be met with silence, or walking on emotional eggshells, hoping not to trigger distance, pause, take a breath. And remember that real love, lasting love, healthy love doesn't keep you in confusion. It's not something you chase or prove or earn. It's something that's built mutually, intentionally, and with emotional safety at its core. The 7-second test isn't about testing someone to catch them in a lie or manipulating a reaction. It's about giving yourself clarity. It's about stepping into a moment of stillness and letting the truth rise without saying a word. Because in those few seconds, people reveal who they are beneath the layers, how they respond to closeness, to safety, to being seen. And if someone can't meet you in that space, then it's not your job to shrink, to chase, or to fix. Your job is to honor your heart, your needs, and your worth. You deserve a love that stays, a love that grows, a love that doesn't disappear the moment things get real. And if someone isn't ready for that, not just in words, but in presence and consistency, then the bravest, most powerful thing you can do is stop waiting. Let go with grace. Make space for something deeper. And remind yourself every single day, the right love won't make you feel like a question mark. It will feel like home.